Hi, I'm Karen Brock, Managing Editor for PieceWork magazine. I've become very interested in historic crochet patterns the last few years working on PieceWork projects. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, crochet was a skill that was taught from childhood. Many crocheters could look at a simple pattern only as depicted in a black and white sketch and know exactly what to do. They could replicate it without any written instructions at all. If written instructions were provided, they typically laid out only the basic construction outlines. Vintage patterns also included only sparse information on yarn or thread, hook size and finished size. The crocheter brought her own knowledge in determining the appropriate materials and the size for the finished project. When working with older patterns, the key elements to tackle are converting to contemporary terms the hook size, the yarn size, and the terminology. So yarn types may be very different in patterns from the 19th and 20th centuries to now. You may encounter such names as Shetland, which is typically lace, and German lambs, which is usually a sport weight, or Berlin, which is a fingering weight. But these yarns were typically used in patterns after the turn of the century. Prior to that, you will find yarn requirements or thread requirements of varying sizes up to 80 and 100, or sometimes something that's just listed as a tatting thread. And then you need to do a little bit of experimentation to figure out exactly what yarn would be best for the project. If it's a very delicate lace edging, then you will want to use a very fine yarn. But it does take a little bit of experimentation. And it also helps to determine the hook size that you need to use. It's very interesting to think about the hook sizes when you're looking at these vintage patterns. For many crochet patterns in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, British notation was used for both the hook sizes and the terminology. So when you're looking at an old pattern, an aluminum old UK hook size 13, for example, would translate into a contemporary American size 1. And for steel hooks, crochet hooks, the old UK hook size 5 would convert into a contemporary size 5 US hook. So you need to decide what hook size will give you the appropriate drape and density for your thread size, and what thread size will give you that desired garment size, because there weren't a lot of instructions, so there has to be a lot of experimentation. The third key element is terminology. Some of the patterns in vintage magazines use English notation, although the magazines were published in the United States. If your results are not close to the illustration, if there is one, try converting the notation. Here are some examples of some turn-of-the-century crochet patterns. And here's an example of Weldon's, which was published in the UK. But there are some very fun patterns in here with a variety of terminology. For English notation, single crochet is an American slip stitch. English short or double crochet is actually American single crochet. And in English notation, ordinary treble is American double crochet. And English double treble is actually American treble. So you can see that it can be quite confusing. We had a situation with PieceWork magazine where we were working on a special issue about crochet, and we sent a lot of these vintage needlework patterns to our crocheters and asked them to crochet samples for us. And we got phone calls and emails in utter despair because the crocheters weren't getting any results like they anticipated. And then we realized it's because we did not provide the translation that they needed in order to crochet the pattern according to the correct terminology and with the correct crochet hook size. Some of the abbreviations used are standard and others are not. For example, miss should be translated as skip. P is picot. Vintage patterns sometimes call for tricot crochet, or more specifically, plain tricot. Tricot is another name for the technique commonly known as Tunisian crochet. And plain tricot refers to the Tunisian simple stitch. So those are the three crucial factors to help you work with vintage crochet patterns. Armed with a few resources for translating the hook size, the thread or yarn size, and the notation from British to contemporary American, you can have fun working with these vintage crochet patterns.